Hey folks, just thought I'd say a few things about the first set that we're going to be pulling from, The Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, which was released in 2002, the very first set released in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! So this set is known for basically two things. When Yu-Gi-Oh! Was at the beginning of its lifespan, the creators didn't really know the kind of game that they were making, and it's not exceptionally well designed. And by that I mean that the monsters in this set are typically very bad or very unwieldy or a combination of both bad and unwieldy and are unlikely to be good beyond the first couple weeks or two when we are probably going to play some of these just because we have nothing better. And the spell cards that are in the set are incredibly powerful. Some of the strongest cards in the history of the game. Many of them were on the ban list for long periods of time. Some of them are still banned to this day. So in this set, we're mostly going to be on the lookout for super powerful spell cards that are going to carry you until they get banned themselves in the context of the progression series, and monsters that we will play because we have to. So, starting with the high rarity cards here, we can see that the two secret rares are both monsters, which is not a good sign. They are Trihorn Dragon, who is the second biggest monster after the Blue Eyes White Dragon available in the set, but does require two tributes in order to summon, which makes it a bit unwieldy to use, and Gaia the Dragon Champion, who, as a fusion, is even more unwieldy to use, because to summon the fusion monsters, you need a polymerization spell, and you also need the two fusion material monsters. So in the case of Gaia the Dragon Champion, it requires a Gaia the Fierce Knight, who you can see here in the ultra rare slot is also going to be hard to get, and a Cursive Dragon, who is a super rare. So the odds of somebody who pulls this card actually being able to make use of it in the immediate future are unfortunately pretty low. Trihorn Dragon might be a good pickup if you can find it. If you decide to go for some of these multiple tribute monsters, which I think the jury's a little bit out on whether or not that's a good idea or not, but they're certainly bigger than any of the ones that you can summon without tributing. So if you're going to go for those, Trihorn Dragon is the second biggest after the Blue Eyes White Dragon here. The iconic card in the set, and in fact all these ultra rare cards are iconic anime cards. You have Blue Eyes, you have Dark Magician, Gaia the Fierce Knight, Red Eyes Black Dragon. They are all larger than the monsters that you can summon without tributing, but they also all require two tributes, which makes them pretty unwieldy, and with no effects either. Unfortunately, a common theme in the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Sets is that most of the monsters don't have effects, and are just sort of monsters that you play and then either attack or defend with. With no effects, it's sort of an open question as to whether or not they're worth the payoff of tributing two different monsters to summon, since they will die to just one removal spell that your opponent might have. But they are here, so I think, if you want to consider using some of them, I would say probably prioritize Blue Eyes and Trihorn Dragon, and then Dark Magician, just basically in decreasing order of attack points. Monster Reborn, on the other hand, is an extremely powerful card who will revive a monster from the graveyard for free, and you can do that to either player's graveyard, and you can still do your once per turn normal summon in the same turn that you use it. So exceptionally powerful, was banned for many, many, many years. You should definitely play as many copies of this as you can pull, if you do manage to get some. And we also have the Exodia pieces. So again, an iconic anime plot device where if you have all five of them in your hand, you win the duel automatically. Nothing that the opponent can do about it. However, in order to do that, you must pull five ultra rare cards from the set, five specific ultra rares, one of each of these pieces, and also manage to draw them all in your hand at the same time, even though they're all very weak and don't really do anything while they're in your hand individually. So unfortunately, not the most viable thing to do. I don't know, maybe there's some sort of modification that we could make to allow Exodia to be theoretically playable. What's most likely to happen is that all of us are going to pull one or two pieces of it, and maybe we can implement some trading system or something like that. I don't know, let me know what you guys think. But most likely, unfortunately, the Exodia pieces are going to end up being dead ultra rares if you get them. At the super rare slots, we have once again a bunch of really powerful spell cards. We have Dark Hole and Raigeki, which were banned for long, long periods of time, which respectively destroy all monsters on the field and just all of your opponent's monsters. Swords of Revealing Light, which I think was never banned, but is still a really good card in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! It basically just buys you 3 free turns where your opponent can't do anything. And Polymerization, which is the least powerful of the 4, but it does open up the possibility of making some of those fusion monsters. Gaia the Dragon Champion is the most powerful one in this set, which is not saying much, but eventually the fusion monsters do get good enough that they're at least theoretically worth using, even though Gaia the Dragon Champion might not be here. And the other super rares are monsters and are unfortunately much worse. We have Celtic Guardian, who's just a 1400 attack point person. Flame Swordsman, another fusion monster who's really hard to summon. Mystical Elf does have 2000 defense. The cards with 2000 defense are... That's the highest either attack or defense stat that's in this set available on a monster that you don't have to tribute for. So those are probably worth picking up, I would say, and probably worth running if you could get them. But there are more that are not super rare that we're going to see later. Curse of Dragon has 2,000 attack points and is actually the strongest monster right now that you can get by only tributing one card instead of two. Pretty sad, but if you believe that tribute summoning monsters is worth it in this format, and it might be, I'm not really sure myself, I'll probably decide depending on what I get. If you believe that tribute summoning monsters is worthwhile in this format, Curse of Dragon might be worth playing. Maneater Bug is the one effect monster here, and not surprisingly, it's also the one good monster here. When it flips face up, either because you flip it face up on your turn or your opponent attacks it, you can destroy any of your opponent's monsters. So it's removal that works on Blue Eyes White Dragon as well as on Kuriboh and anything in between those two extremes, which is really, really incredible for this early in the format and definitely worth playing if you can get it. And Trap Hole is the one trap card, and I think is one of 3 trap cards that are actually in Legend of Blue Eyes, and it's certainly the best of them. It destroys a monster that your opponent summons if it has more than 1,000 attack or something like that. If you played Yu-Gi-Oh! As a kid, you probably remember losing to this card. I certainly do, because it was in all the starter decks and was very effective at destroying your Blue Eyes White Dragons. So I would definitely play this if I managed to pull it as well. Now at the rare slot, we see a bunch of fusion monsters, which unfortunately are not super useful. We see Aquamador and Giant Soldier of Stone, 2 other, and Spirit of the Harp, are 3 guys who have 2,000 defense, which is higher than any of the attack stats that you can get at this point, so probably worth it. Fissure, which is another one of the extremely rare pieces of monster removal that we have available to us. Two-Pronged Attack is a trap card that is also monster removal, but it is extremely bad. You have to tribute 2 of your monsters, and you have to use the Two-Pronged Attack card. So you lose 3 cards, and for the price of that, you only get to destroy 1 opponent's monster. That is really, really bad, but unfortunately there are so few other ways to get rid of difficult monsters in this set that it might be worth playing if you get it anyways. Dragon Capture Jar, which is the only continuous trap in this set, which will stay on the field after you activate it. Basically, it shuts down opponent's dragon-type monsters, so it could be worth using if you think your opponent is going to go for the Blue Eyes White Dragon or the Trihorn Dragon, that sort of approach. We also have the Reaper of the Cards here, which is one, and Arm Ninja. Reaper of the Cards and Arm Ninja, I think, are two of the only effect monsters, and they remove trap cards. So if you flip one face up, you can look at one of your opponent's traps, one of your opponent's face down cards, and destroy it if it happened to be a trap. That is ordinarily sort of a slow effect, but given how little else we have to work with, they could be useful here. We have Hane, who is a very strong effect monster who can return an opponent's monster card to the hand, which means they'll have to summon it again, and if it's a tribute summon monster, they're going to have to, tribute another monster again to play it, so it can be very useful. I would say of these spells, most of these spells are not sort of iconic staples. Goblin's Secret Remedy just heals you, Final Flame just does a little bit of damage, not too worth it, with 2 big exceptions. Stop Defense is a pretty strong card. There's going to be a lot of setting defense position monsters probably in the first few sets because there are these monsters running around with 2,000 defense and no monster has an attack that you can summon without tributing that comes even close to that. So if you use Stop Defense, you can beat those monsters and also probably do a significant chunk of damage. And Pot of Greed, who is an iconic card, is definitely the strongest card in the entire set, just draws you 2 cards absolutely for free, and it's only a rare, so we're probably all going to pull some of this card, and you should definitely play it at as many copies as you can until it is banned, which it probably will be very quickly. This is, I think, the only card from Legend of Blue Eyes that is still banned to this day, and it will never, ever, 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 ever not be unbanned. Definitely play as many Pot of Greeds as you find. Short Print, I guess these are cards that are slightly less common than the commons, but less rare than the rares. We have a bunch of equip spells, which typically are not extremely useful, but in a format like this one, where the power levels of the monsters are so close to one another, they actually could be quite good. So, in particular, for the monsters that have, a lot is probably going to be determined in the first few episodes by who can sort of get one of their like 1500 or so attack point monsters to stick on the board for a couple of turns. And as you can imagine, adding an equip card that boosts your monster's attack by 300 points will greatly increase the odds of that happening if all your opponent has to work with is other 1500 attack point monsters. So in particular, you're going to probably want to pull whichever ones of these equip cards work well with whatever high attack point monsters you happen to get in the commons. So here are the commons. Unfortunately, they're mostly a bunch of normal monsters, but we're going to have to use a bunch of them just so that we don't die to our opponent's normal monsters. So there are a bunch of guys here with 1200 or 1300 attack, which is really, really sad, but unfortunately probably worth using at this point. The best of these monsters is, so the three highest statted ones, the three highest offensively statted ones are, there are two 1400s, I think, Fire Yarrow and Witty Phantom. There's one 1500, Yorubi, and there's one 1550, which is the highest attack stat in the set, and that is Skull Red Bird. So Skull Red Bird is a winged beast, so if you pull a bunch of those, you might want to consider having some follow-ins, which is the one that boosts wing beast monsters, so you can beat your opponent's Skull Red Birds. If you get a bunch of Yorubis, you might want some Raised Body Heat, which works with dinosaurs, so you can beat your opponent's other Yorubi or Skull Red Bird. There's going to be a lot of Yorubi and Skull Red Bird in this meta, I predict. There are also field spells, which boost a bunch of monsters on both sides of the field, and also so they boost certain types of monsters on both sides of the field, and they also weaken other types of monsters. I feel like the jury is a little bit out, in my opinion, about whether or not these are super good. I'll probably be playing whichever ones work with my 4-star monsters if I manage to pull the appropriate ones, but because they also boost your opponent's monsters of the same type, it can get kind of difficult to actually achieve something with them. There are also some folks like Beaver Warrior who have 1500 defense that might be worth using. Tyhone has 1400 defense. And finally, some of these other spell cards, these ones are also just healing and direct damage spells, which is sort of a weak effect. Remove Trap will get rid of a trap, but only if it was already face up. So in Legend of Blue Eyes, this card is good exclusively for Dragon Capture Jar. So if you think your opponent might use Dragon Capture Jar, it could be worth playing. And if not, probably not. It's definitely not as good as Arm Ninja Reaper of the Cards, which can check if the card is a spell card, if it's face down, and will get rid of it if it was a trap, rather than needing to wait for continuous spell cards that stay on the field like you have to with Remove Trap. And unfortunately, that is pretty much all that we have in Legend of Blue Eyes. It's a very underpowered set, especially with the monsters. You can see there are a bunch of 1 tribute monsters at the end here. There's Steel Ogre Grotto, who I think has something like 1800 defense. Spike Seadra has 1600 attack. But that's barely better than Skull Red Bird, and the Steel Ogre is actually worse than Giant Soldier of Stone, who you can summon without tributing at all. So, really not a lot going on here. The games are probably going to be determined by Pot of Greed, Raigeki, and Dark Hole, and 1500 monster beatdown, and maybe also equip spells, and whether or not you decide to play some of these tribute summon monsters like Curse of Dragon or the double tribute monsters. All right, good luck to everyone, and every other set will be more interesting than this one, I promise.